I remember the day I left my city as if it were yesterday. The air was heavy, and my chest burned with a mixture of fear and regret. My hands were trembling as I zipped up my suitcase, and every sound in that small apartment echoed like a goodbye I wasn't ready to give. I looked out the window one last time, watching the gray sky swallow the sunlight, and I whispered to myself, "You can't stay here forever." For years, that city had been my whole world. Every corner carried a memory: the park bench where I laughed with my friends after school, the small cafe where I'd sit alone dreaming of something more, and the narrow street where my mother would call me back home before it got dark. Leaving meant tearing myself away from everything familiar, but staying felt like slowly suffocating in a place that no longer believed in me. I'd lost too much there: my job, my confidence, and in some ways myself. After the breakup with Daniel, everything felt like it was falling apart. He wasn't just my boyfriend. He was the person I had built my future around. We had plans: a house, a dog, maybe even a family. But people change. And sometimes, love isn't enough to keep two hearts moving in the same direction. When he left, I didn't just lose him. I lost my sense of who I was. The city started to feel like a museum of broken dreams. Every street corner whispered his name. Every song on the radio carried a piece of us. I thought I could handle it, that time would heal it all. But time in that place only deepened the wounds. So when I got the offer to move to another city for work, I didn't think twice. Or maybe I did 1,000 times, but my heart already knew the answer. I needed to leave. I needed to breathe again. The night before my departure, I went for a walk through my neighborhood. The streetlights flickered like they were saying goodbye. I passed the bakery where the owner always called me Sunshine, even on days when I felt like a storm. I passed Daniel's apartment and saw his window still lit. For a moment, I wanted to ring his bell and tell him everything. How scared I was, how much I still loved him, how I didn't know who I'd be without him. But I didn't. I kept walking. The next morning, as the taxi drove away, I looked back at my city fading in the distance, and the tears came uncontrollably. It wasn't just sadness, it was grief, fear, and hope all tangled together. I didn't know what waited for me ahead, but deep down I felt it. Something inside me was shifting. The new city was louder, faster, and far less forgiving. First, I felt invisible. No one knew me, no one cared about my story. I was just another stranger trying to make a living, and there were nights when I questioned if I'd made the right decision. I'd stare at the ceiling of my small rented apartment and whisper, "What am I doing here?" But life, I've learned, has a strange way of teaching us through discomfort. It strips away everything you thought defined you: your relationships, your job, your sense of belonging, until you're forced to find your own reflection again. The first real turning point came when I met Clara, my new coworker. She was different from anyone I'd known before: loud, brutally honest, and full of a kind of energy that could light up a room. She saw something in me I couldn't see myself. "You're too quiet," she told me one day during lunch. "You've got a story in your eyes, but you keep hiding it. Why?" I didn't know how to answer. Maybe because I'd spent too long being afraid of my own story, afraid that if I opened up, I'd fall apart again. But Clara didn't give up. She started dragging me to after-work gatherings, introducing me to new people, making me laugh again. Slowly, I began to realize that I was capable of more than just surviving. I could live again. I started journaling, something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. At first, my entries were messy, full of confusion and loneliness. But as days passed, they began to change. I wrote about small victories: cooking a meal that actually tasted good, finishing a project at work, going a whole day without thinking about Daniel. It felt like I was piecing myself back together, one word at a time. Then came the day I decided to explore the city alone. It was a Saturday morning, and I remember waking up with a strange sense of calm. I took the train to the coast, where the wind smelled like salt and freedom. As I stood there watching the waves crash against the rocks, I realized something profound. I wasn't running away anymore. I was rebuilding. I closed my eyes and let the wind hit my face. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel lost. I just felt alive. In that moment, I promised myself that I would stop defining my worth by what I'd lost. I wasn't the same girl who had cried in a taxi leaving her old city. I was someone new, someone stronger, even if I hadn't fully realized it yet. A few weeks later, Clara convinced me to attend a small art exhibit downtown. She said it was the kind of thing that feeds your soul. And she wasn't wrong. The gallery was filled with photographs of people from different parts of the world. Their eyes, their hands, their silent stories. One image caught my attention. A woman standing in front of a burning field, her face both terrified and determined. The caption read, "To start again, you must let the past burn." That line stayed with me for days. I wrote it on a sticky note and placed it on my mirror. Every morning when I got ready for work, I'd look at it and remind myself, starting over isn't weakness, it's courage. And then life surprised me again. It was a rainy Tuesday when I met someone, completely by accident. His name was Raphael, and we bumped into each other at a bookstore after I dropped a stack of novels on the floor. I laughed nervously, apologizing as he helped me pick them up. "You have good taste," he said, glancing at the titles. "Especially this one." He held up The Alchemist. We ended up talking for over an hour, sitting on the steps outside while the rain softened around us. He wasn't like Daniel. There was no rush, no pressure, no need to be anyone but myself. He asked questions that made me think, not just about my past but about what I wanted from the future. Over the next few weeks we met for coffee, for walks, for quiet moments that slowly felt like home. But this time I wasn't searching for someone to fix me. I wasn't trying to fill a void. I was finally whole enough to let someone in. Not because I needed love to survive, but because I wanted to share the peace I had fought to find. There were still moments of doubt, of course. Healing isn't a straight line. Some nights I still cried, missing what once was, wondering if I'd ever truly belong. But the difference now was that I didn't let the sadness define me. I allowed it to pass through me like a wave, knowing it wouldn't drown me anymore. One evening, I went back to my old journal and read my first entries, the ones filled with pain and confusion. I barely recognized the person who had written them. That woman had believed her life was over when she left her city. But she didn't realize she was only at the beginning of something beautiful. I closed the journal, smiled, and whispered, "Thank you," because sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the ones that save us. That night I called my mother. We hadn't spoken much since I left, mostly because every conversation turned into a reminder of what I'd abandoned. But when she picked up, her voice sounded softer than I remembered. "I was just thinking about you," she said. "I miss you, Mom." There was silence on the other end, not awkward but full of unspoken forgiveness. "I know, sweetheart," she said finally, "but I think you're where you're supposed to be." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time I realized she understood, maybe even more than I did. After that call, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. I thought about how far I'd come, from a girl who cried leaving her home to a woman who could finally look forward without fear. And as the rain began to fall again, gentle and rhythmic, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Because sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. Not from people or places, but from the version of you that no longer fits. And in that quiet realization I knew I was finally free. The days after that quiet night felt different, lighter. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The sound of birds outside my window, the smell of freshly brewed coffee from the cafe downstairs, the way the sunlight painted golden lines across my kitchen table every morning. Life was still the same, but I wasn't. I had changed. Every small act, cooking breakfast, taking the subway, greeting strangers, became a reminder of the person I was becoming. For so long I had measured my happiness by milestones. Relationships, achievements, validation. Now it was the simple things that grounded me. Raphael and I grew closer, but it wasn't like before, not like Daniel and me. There was no urgency, no expectation to be perfect. He didn't try to fix my scars. He respected them. When I told him about my past, the heartbreak, the move, the loneliness, he just listened. No pity, no judgment. One evening as we sat by the waterfront, watching the reflection of city lights ripple across the water, he said something that stayed with me. "You know what I think?" he began softly. "Some people spend their whole lives waiting for the right moment to start living. But maybe the right moment doesn't come. Maybe we have to create it." His words hit me deep, because that was exactly what I had done, created my moment. A few months later I got promoted at work. It wasn't something I had chased desperately. It came naturally, like a quiet acknowledgement from life that I was finally on the right path. Clara hugged me so tight that day I could barely breathe. "You see," she said with that contagious smile, "you just needed to believe in yourself." And maybe she was right. But even with all that progress, there were still moments that tested me. One of them came when I received a message from Daniel. It was short, just a few lines, but my heart raced as soon as I saw his name on the screen. "Hey, I heard you moved. I'm in your city for a few days. Would love to see you." I stared at it for a long time. My hands trembled the same way they had the day I left my hometown. Part of me wanted to ignore it to protect the peace I'd built. But another part, the one that still carried memories like scars, wanted closure. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying moments from the past, the way he used to laugh, the promises we made, the pain of watching it all fall apart. But as I looked around my apartment, surrounded by pieces of a life I had built on my own, I realized something powerful. I wasn't afraid anymore. So the next day I agreed to meet him. We met at a small cafe downtown. Not the one from our past, but a new one in a new chapter. When he walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked the same but older, somehow tired. Time had left its mark on both of us. He smiled. "You look happy." "I am," I said honestly. For a moment we sat in silence, the kind that carries 1,000 unspoken words. Then he sighed. "I've thought about you a lot. About us. I was stupid. I should have fought harder." I looked at him, really looked. And for the first time I didn't feel anger or sadness. Just gratitude. "Maybe," I said softly. "But if you had, maybe I wouldn't have learned how to fight for myself." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "You've changed." "I had to," I replied. "I had to lose everything to find myself again." We talked for a while about the past, about how things ended, about how we both grew up in our own ways. And when it was time to say goodbye, it didn't hurt. Felt right. Walking away from that cafe, I felt lighter than I ever had. Closure isn't about rewriting the past. It's about understanding it. And in that moment, I understood that leaving my city wasn't just about escaping heartbreak. It was about making space for who I was meant to become. Weeks turned into months, and life kept unfolding beautifully. Raphael and I started traveling on weekends. Small trips to nearby towns, hiking trails, quiet beaches. I learned to love the world again, not because it was easy, but because I had learned to love myself first. There was one particular weekend that I'll never forget. We drove to a small coastal village, far from the chaos of the city. The place was quiet, almost untouched by time. We stayed in a simple guest house run by an elderly couple who treated us like family. One morning I woke up before sunrise and went outside. The sea was calm, the sky painted in soft shades of orange and pink. I stood there barefoot in the sand, feeling the cool breeze on my face. Raphael joined me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You're quiet," he said softly. "I'm just thinking," I replied, "about how far I've come." He smiled. "You deserve every bit of peace you feel right now." I looked at him, and for the first time in years I believed that. We watched the sun rise together, and I thought about that girl, the one who cried when she left her city, terrified of what lay ahead. If only she could see me now. Life had given me more than I ever expected. Not because it became perfect, but because I learned to embrace its imperfections. When we got back home, I decided to visit my old city. Not out of longing, but out of love, for the place that shaped me, broke me, and pushed me toward the woman I had become. The moment I stepped off the train, my heart raced. Everything looked smaller, quieter. The streets were familiar, yet distant, like echoes from another lifetime. I walked through my old neighborhood, past the bakery, past the park, past the apartment building where I had once cried myself to sleep. And when I finally reached the spot where I'd watched the taxi drive away years ago, I stopped. The memory hit me hard. That younger version of myself, scared and lost, believing she was running from failure. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you," because I realized that leaving wasn't an act of weakness. It was an act of courage. Before heading back to the station, I stopped by the small bookstore where I used to buy secondhand novels. The owner was still there, a little older, his smile still kind. "You look familiar," he said. "Have we met?" "Maybe," I smiled. "A long time ago." He chuckled. "Time changes everything, doesn't it?" "Yes," I said softly. "Everything." When I got back to my new city, I felt complete. Not because I had found all the answers, but because I had learned to live with the questions. That night, I lit a candle by my window. A small ritual I'd started recently. It reminded me to pause, to breathe, to honor every version of myself that got me here. I opened my journal again and began to write. I cried a lot when I left my city. I thought I was losing everything. But now I see I wasn't losing. I was transforming. Tears filled my eyes, not from sadness but from gratitude. Because time had shown me what pain could never teach, that growth is often disguised as loss, and sometimes the hardest roads lead us home to ourselves. Now, when I think about that moment, the day I left my city, the tears, the fear, I don't see it as an ending anymore. It was the beginning of my freedom. Life didn't take away my happiness. It simply guided me toward the version of myself who could finally create it. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you'll ever do. Because in every goodbye, there's a quiet promise that somewhere ahead you'll find yourself again. And you'll finally understand why you had to leave.